The concept of globalization has numerous definitions, depending on the subject matter that is being explained. To international economists, globalization has a simple definition, albeit one with powerful implications. Specifically, globalization occurs when the markets of different countries become integrated and interconnected through economic transactions on cross-national borders. These transactions can be in the form of real merchandise, various forms of services, financial instruments, investments in local production facilities by multinational firms, a process called foreign direct investment, temporary and permanent labor migration, and technological information. They can involve individuals, trade between unrelated firms, transactions within international enterprises, and governments. In short, globalization is about of all the country that help each other to become successful country. Example of this is the foreign people invest in your country or build a business. So your country becomes successful because all of your countrymen will have a work because of that business. When people think about globalization, they often think first of the increasing volume of trade in goods and services. Economic movements are also one of the most noticeable forms of globalization. However, other experts claim that foreign trade is a much greater factor that moves the world toward deeper global integration. Investment can modify the entire processes of development by the conversion of information, technologies, and etc., resulting in even greater improvement than the mere exchange of commodities. Globalization implies the continuing expansion and intensification of economic, political, social, cultural, and judicial relationships across borders. It is advanced by reductions in transportation and communication costs, the rise of new information technologies such as the internet, and liberalizations in the markets for goods, services, labor, capital, and technology. The term globalization originates from the Latin term globus, or globe in English. The term globe, which is believed to be dated from the 15th century, means the spherical representation of the Earth. The term globalization was first used in the English language in 1959. Far from being a fad, scholars believe that the term globalization was invented because a new terminology is needed to discuss a new condition. Theodore Levitt, who was an American economist and lecturer at the Harvard Business School, was believed to have invented the term globalization due to his use of the term in most of his works. In the 1980s, this is another video that explaining about globalization.
Globalization is a widely discussed topic. It is therefore not all that easy to explain such a complicated term in simple words. Let's start from the beginning with the background to globalization. Advances in technology, such as mobile phones, aeroplanes, telephones, and the internet, have made the growth of transport and communication networks possible. Amongst other things, this means that people and countries can exchange information and goods more quickly and in a less complicated way. This process is called globalization. Globalization comes from globe and means the worldwide coming together of countries and nations. Let's look at an example. Companies used to manufacture products in their home countries, just like the companies Profi TV and Supercolor, who produce televisions in country A. Their products are in direct competition with each other, but both companies pay the same salaries and production costs. They have the same customers, use similar suppliers, and sell televisions at similar prices. In short, the same conditions apply to both companies. So far, so good. Due to technical, cultural, and economic developments that have come about through globalization, other companies which manufacture products under different conditions can now offer their products in country A too. That's why a company from country B can sell televisions here at a lower price because they were produced for less. The local firms Supercolor and Profi TV have to react to withstand the competition. And so the world grows closer together, and there is an active exchange of goods between countries. More affordable products are available for more people. However, not only does an exchange of products and economic goods take place, but also of services, knowledge, cultural goods, and even languages. All of these individual elements are closely linked and influence each other. But where there is light, there is also shadow. Because of globalization and this intense exchange of goods, people and the environment often suffer. If a company decides to move production to an economically disadvantaged country, people in industrialized countries lose their jobs. At the same time, job opportunities open up to many locals in the economically disadvantaged country. Many people in these countries work for very little money in comparison to those in industrialized countries. Therefore, they often remain poor and more often than not do not have sufficient insurance, social insurance, or health insurance cover. A further disadvantage of globalization is ecological problems such as climate change. The use of aeroplanes, ships, and lorries to transport goods over international borders is constantly on the increase. This causes more carbon dioxide to be released into the atmosphere, which, in turn, is the main cause of global warming. Even national environmental standards are ignored. This is a further cost factor in the worldwide international site competition, which should be kept as low as possible to be attractive for a company. There are therefore many sides to globalization which affect almost all aspects of life, causing me to think that the chain of positive and negative effects will continue to grow further. What's important is to realize that globalization itself is neither good nor bad. It just depends how people deal with all the new possibilities in the future.
Globalization has different definitions as explained by various scholars. Some of these definitions are the follows. Giovanni Reyes 2001 explained that the term globalization has two principal meanings. First, globalization is a phenomenon. He implied a greater interdependence among different regions and countries in the world in terms of finances, trade, and communications. Second, globalization is a theory of economic development. It assumes that a greater level of integration is taking place among different regions of the world, and this integration has an important impact on economic growth. Giovanni Reyes gives two principal meanings about globalization. The first is globalization is a phenomenon, and it means that all of the regions have a greater interdependence in terms of finances, trade, and communication. The second one is the globalization is a theory about economic development, which means the globalization have a great impact to the economic growth of all country. Bechtel 2009 explained that globalization is the process through which sovereign national states are interwoven and undermined by transnational actors with varying prospects of powers, orientations, identities, and networks. Schaefer 2007 added that globalization points to spatial expansion or developments that involve the world. Atkin 2002 believed that according to the ideology of globalism, globalization as a process is determined by market forces and not the state. The terms origin and definition and connotation are largely disputed. Scholars and academics argue whether globalization denotes a process, a phenomenon, or a belief system. Many of these arguments arise from the loose and interchangeable use of terms, thereby causing further confusion and disagreement. Terms and concepts that are closely related to the subject of globalization include interconnectedness and interdependence. Integration and flows should be defined as well. Interconnectedness. Interconnectedness, which is referred to as global interconnectedness, is the connection and oneness of entities and actors in a globalized world such that the action or actions of these actors have consequences on other actors and the world in general. Interconnectedness is about of all the nation have a connection to each other. Interdependence. Interdependence, which is also known as global interdependence, refers to the mutual dependence of countries or nation-states and other important actors in the international community, individuals, NGOs, business organizations, and international organizations, for one another's resources, services, information, and data. It means interdependence refers to two or more countries that impact and rely on each other, while globalization is the economic, social, and political interaction and integration of people in different areas of the world. Nowadays, most nations are interdependent and related in a globalized world. The next one is integration. Integration, which is also referred to as global integration, means the process of organization of component elements, which can be an actor, process, phenomenon, activity, or events, in separate locations around the world in a harmonious world. Its short integration implies the adoption of policies by separate countries as if they were a single political unit. The degree of integration is often tested by seeing whether interest rates or share prices or the prices of goods are the same in different national markets. The last one is flows. Flow is the rate of movement of goods, resources, services, information, data, transactions, finance, and people on a global scale. Definitions of globalization. Globalization is a process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations that is driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology. This process has effects on the environment, culture, political systems, economic development and prosperity, and human physical well-being in societies around the world. This video is to explain briefly the definitions of globalization.
We explain the process of globalization. Globalization is the term used to describe the way countries are becoming more interconnected, both economically and culturally. Globalization is an international process driven by trade, investment, technology and finance. This process has effects on the environment, on culture, on political systems, on economic development and prosperity, and on human physical well-being in societies around the world. Globalization is not new, though. For thousands of years, people, and, later, corporations, have been buying from and selling to each other in lands at great distances. One such example is the famed Silk Road across Central Asia that connected China and Europe during the Middle Ages. But what exactly drives globalization? Over the past 20 years there have been significant developments in both communications and transport technologies. The introduction of specialized bulk carriers and container ships has helped to reduce the cost of transport and greatly increase the volume of world trade. Recent developments in communications technology, especially the development of the internet and email, enable people anywhere on Earth to have access to and distribute vast amounts of information. The production and distribution of goods and services is increasingly dominated by very large companies known as transnational corporations, TNCs. The business links of TNCs create a more integrated world economy where decisions made in one country can affect people in other parts of the world. International trade has given countries access to goods and services they are unable to produce themselves or can obtain more cheaply from other places. Watch the next video to find out the impacts of globalization.
Conceptions about globalization. Since its first appearance in Webster's Dictionary in 1961, many opinions about globalization have flourished. The literature on the definitions of globalization revealed that definitions could be classified as either broad and inclusive or narrow and exclusive. The following perspectives show different conceptions about globalization. The first one is liberalism and globalization. Liberalism sees the process of globalization as a market-led extension of modernization. At the most elementary level, it is a result of natural human desires for economic welfare and political liberty. As such, transplanetary connectivity is derived from human drives to maximize material well-being and exercise basic freedoms. These forces eventually interlink humanity across the planet. The globalization of liberalism demonstrates that liberalism is more deeply embedded in the structure of modern international political and economic order than is usually realized, and that at present there is a contested process of the globalization of liberalism. Second is realism and globalization. Power is the only resource that matters with regard to understanding the manner through which nation-states interact with each other. States are inherently acquisitive and self-serving and heading for an inevitable competition of power. Some of the scholars stand for a balanced power, where any attempt by one state to achieve world Dominance is countered by collective resistance from other states. Realism suggests that globalization will breed suspicion, vulnerability, and conflict because the more interdependent people and states become, the more insecure they will be. Waltz, 1979. Marxism and globalization. Marxism is principally concerned with the modes of production, social exploitation through unjust distribution, and social emancipation through the transcendence of capitalism. Marx himself anticipated the growth of globality that capital by its nature drives beyond every spatial barrier to conquer the whole earth for its market. Accordingly, to Marxists, globalization happens because transworld connectivity enhances the opportunities of profit-making and surplus accumulation. Marx's ideas about overproduction led him to predict what is now called globalization, the spread of capitalism across the planet in search of new markets. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe, he wrote. Constructivism and globalization. Globalization has also risen because of the way that people have mentally constructed the social world with particular symbols, language, images, and interpretation. It is the result of particular forms and dynamics of consciousness. The patterns of production and governance are second-order structures that derive from deep cultural and socio-psychological forces. Such accounts of globalization have come from the fields of anthropology, humanities, media studies, and sociology. Constructivism provides a particular view on globalization processes, a lens which allows us to interpret globalization in distinctive ways and which leads us to ask specific questions about it. I suggest two ways in which social constructivism can enlighten our understanding of globalization. Next is postmodernism and globalization. Postmodernism, such as Marxism, helps go beyond the relatively superficial accounts of liberalist and political realist theories and expose social conditions that have favored globalization. Postmodernism suffers from its methodological idealism. All material forces, although they come under the impact of ideas, cannot be reduced to modes of consciousness. For a valid explanation, the interconnection between ideational and material forces is insufficient. Postmodernists see the media as central to globalization and emphasize the positive effects media globalization has on society. Interest in postmodernity that has stagnated over the past decade has come to be replaced by a concern with globalization. While the two terms are often considered to be divergent, there is a continuity as theoretical discourse transfers from one to the other. Feminism and globalization. It emphasizes the social construction of masculinity and femininity. All other theories have identified the dynamics behind the increase in transplanetary and supraterritorial connectivity in technology, state, capital, identity, etc. Feminism important. Feminism allows equal opportunities for both sexes. Gender roles, a set of conforming rules that say how a person should behave based on their gender, can be harmful to both men and women. It is also unfair to place pressure on boys to fulfill certain roles that are based on their gender. Last is transformationalism and globalization. This perspective was expounded by David Held and his colleagues. Accordingly, the term globalization reflects increased interconnectedness in political, economic, and cultural matters across the world, thereby creating a shared social space. Considering this interconnectedness, globalization may be defined as a process that embodies a transformation in the spatial organization of social relations and transactions, which is expressed in transcontinental or interregional flows and networks of activity, interaction, and power. Transformationalists argue that the flow of culture is not one way, from the West to the developing world. It is a two-way exchange in which Western culture is also influenced, changed, and enriched by cultures in the developing world. Against global pessimists, transformationalists argue that local cultures are not simply swallowed up by Western cultures. Transformationalists and postmodernists also see the global media as beneficial because it is primarily responsible for diffusing different cultural styles around the world and creating new, global hybrid styles in fashion, food, music, consumption, and lifestyle. I introduced to all of you Mr. Zarhi is the one explaining the philosophies of globalization.
At the end of this lesson, you should be able to analyze the different philosophies and ideologies of globalization. So we have to really study the philosophies and ideologies of globalization. and we have to analyze it. Ano ba yung gustong iparating ito? Ano ba yung gustong sabihin nito when it comes to the emergence of globalization? Okay? Let's proceed. First, for your to fully understand these philosophies and the ideologies, let's first define what is philosophy. Philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand a fundamental truths about themselves, the world they live in, and their relationship to the world and to each other. Meaning, as a human, we are very intuitive and a curious human being or creature. And this is the process that we undertake to understand why a certain matter exists, what our purpose in this life, what our purpose in this particular thing, and ano yung relationship natin do sa specificong bagay nito, sa specificong taong ito, ano ba yung tunguhin natin sa buhay, ano ba yung sinusundan nating paniniwala o filosofiya. That is philosophy. When we have philosophy, or kung may pinaniniwalaan tayo, we are able to understand bakit may nag-i-exist na ganitong bagay, ano yung ating relationship sa ganitong bagay, and ano yung relationship natin sa isa't isa. Yun po yung sinasabi ng philosophy. Basta pag meron ka niyan, maiintindihan mo why you exist in this world. Okay, the first philosophy of globalization is capitalism. What is capitalism? From the root word capital means puhunan. Bakit ba nagkaroon ng globalization? Dahil ang mga forefathers ng globalization naniniwala sila sa capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is the dominant economic framework and system in many parts of the world today. It is primarily premised on the profit motive. It promotes claim that seeking profits is the basic aim of any individual or entity in this world. The profit motive partly explain why. Ibig sabihin, nagkakaroon daw po ng globalization dahil sa paniniwala ng mga forefathers ng globalization na dito sa mundo, kailangan mong puhunan, capital, namumuhunan, para mag-succeed ka. You have to seek profit, you have to seek different capitals in a different ways. And paano ka ba kakakuha nun? Kakakuha ka nun pag mag-i-invest ka sa iba't ibang bansa, sa iba't ibang lugar, magtatayo ka ng iba't ibang branch. Para sa kanila, para magkaroon ng globalization or rather, kaya nagkaroon ng globalization kasi kailangan ng tao ng puhunan. Yun yung foundation niya para magkaroon ng globalization. Parang ang paniniwala ng mga forefathers ng globalization na kapag namuhunan ka, andin yung part na pwede kang mag-succeed, pwede kang umunlad, not just yourself, but also your country, na kasi pag marami kang puhunan, marami kang magagawa. You can build different industries, different infrastructures, different businesses, kaya mo pang magkaroon ng iba't ibang branch sa ibang bansa. That's why capitalism is one of the philosophies of globalization. Yan po yung pinaniniwalaan nila. Para magkaroon ng globalization, kailangan profit motive or yung mindset ng mga tao is magkaroon ng puhunan for their own success or for the success of their country or their businesses, their infrastructure, to build different infrastructure. That's why capitalism is one of the basic philosophy of globalization. Next philosophy is neoliberalism. What is neoliberalism? From the word liberalism, liberalism is a freedom. Yes, you have the freedom, liberty, freedom. and neo means new. So, new freedom, kung i-translate natin per word, it means new freedom. Because liberalism is all about freedom, and neo means new. So, let's dig in. Neoliberalism adherents further build on the profit motive by asserting that for capitalism to thrive, markets should be free from government intervention, claiming that free markets and free trade will set free the creative potential and the entrepreneur spirit, which is built spontaneous order of any human society, and thereby led to more individual liberty and well-being and more efficient allocation of resources. Whew, 'di ba? Parang ang heavy, hindi ko na-reach. Joke, na-reach ko naman siya. Let's make it simple. Um, Neoliberalism, this philosophy, sabi ng mga forefathers, para magkaroon ng globalization, dapat free siya from the government intervention. Dapat hindi daw mangingialam ang government when it comes to globalization. Well, in fact, hindi siya mag-work if walang intervention ng government. On the other hand, otherwise, ang pinaniniwalaan naman ng mga forefathers ng globalization, dapat free from government intervention. Kasi pag may kung hindi mangangailam ang government, magkakaroon ng free market and free trade will. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng dalawang to? When we say free market, andyan yung transactions between consumers and buyers na kung saan itong not consumers and buyers, producers and consumers. Wherein sa free market, itong producers o yung suppliers, they have the right or they have the power to control the price, to control the supply. Sila yung magtatalaga kung magkano ba yung price na ilalagay nila, tataasan ba nila, bababaan ba nila, lalagyan ba nila ng tax. Nasa kanila yun, hindi sa pangangailam ng government. On the other hand, in a free trade will, sa isang bansa, kapag import or nakipagkalakalan ka ng isang produkto, even though it is illegal, makakapasok pa rin siya. Like what I've said before in the lesson 1 natin, na kapag globalization, makakapasok siya anything. Makakapasok, kahit anong produkto makakapasok sa isang bansa without any requirements. Kahit walang tax, wala kang babay, makakapasok siya. And that is neoliberalism. It is more on the freedom from the liberty, especially in free markets and in free trade will. So sabi nila, they have the power to set the prices, to set the quantity of supplies, kung gaano ba na karami. At nandun din yung kapangyarihan nila na mag-import, mag-export ng kahit anong klaseng produkto, even though it's illegal or it will bad for consumption. Yan po yung sinasabi ng neoliberalism. Kasi daw, kapag merong free markets, free trade will, at free from government intervention, magiging mayabong yung isang ekonomiya. Magkakaroon ng potential, or maraming taong magkakaroon ng potential and entrepreneurial spirit, o yung mga skills of being a business or a business tycoon. Yung mga businessman, businesswoman, kapag daw hindi nangingialam ang government, mas maraming mga businessmen ang magiging businessman or magiging tycoon, or maraming magkakaroon ng businesses na eventually magpapayabong or magpapalakas sa isang ekonomiya. That was neoliberalism means. More on sila sa freedom. Freedom talaga sila. Kasi para sa kanila, kapag hindi sila pangangailaman, mas mag-upgrade sila, mas mag-i-improve sila. Yun ang gusto nila. At ang kanila, kapag ganun yung nangyari, mas magkakaroon sila ng proper, efficient allocation of resources, and magkakaroon din ng individual liberty yung mga tao. Na ma ma-manage nila kung paano ba yung resources natin ma-allocate sa lahat ng tao without the intervention of government. Yeah. Yun po ang neoliberalism. Isa po yun sa philosophy ng globalization na dapat ganyan daw po yung kalakaran kapag may globalization na. 'Di ba? Napaka ideal ng neoliberalism na philosophy, free from government interaction. Pwede ba yun? Pero there's not, or walang imposible, maraming magbabago kapag na-reach na natin talaga yung globalization. Okay, next. Yan, bali po ang philosophy, dalawa lang, the capitalism and neoliberalism. So, pupunta na po tayo ngayon sa ideologies naman. Sa mga ideologies, sa mga set of beliefs, or yung mga platforms mo. Platforms of globalization. Para mas i-embrace pa siya ng tao.
And that's is the meaning of the philosophies of globalization.
So yun guys, sana may natutunan kayo sa aming presentation about globalization. Again, I'm Erlasis Cabalquinto and I'm from BSHM 1133.